It's rare for a JRPG to hold my attention for a 100-hour runtime, but Xenoblade Chronicles 3 did it with confidence.
Nah, I still have Scarlet Nexus anyways. Let's make something clear. Anime and JRPGs are much more widely accepted and appealing than ever. It's kind of hard to believe how long it took, yet at how fast of a rate the game industry transitioned to this change. Sure, we had various releases and they did have their fans, but they were always considered very niche compared to other titles. Now we have these kinds of projects made with massive budgets, better marketing, and overall just more variety for the consumer. And you know, this always left me wondering what caused this massive transition of appeal. While there is no definitive or exact point when it all happened, the recent release of Xenoblade Chronicles 3 did remind me of something. That being Operation Rainfall. For those who are unaware, this was an internet campaign from Nintendo fans to get 3 unlocalized games on the Wii. While there have been several and insane stories like this before, most recently the Break Free Persona movement. This is one of the more interesting ones for various reasons. I thought it'd be nice to take a look back to what led to Xenoblade's success and this change in perception on Japanese-style RPGs. See this as a little retrospective on the matter while adding some thoughts on the business decisions throughout. This is the history behind Operation Rainfall. To begin our story, I want to give some background on the team. Meet Tetsuya Takahashi, developer for Nihon Falcom and Squaresoft. He contributed to multiple projects with his wife during their time at Square. Some of these include, but are not limited to, Final Fantasy IV, 5, and 6. It was during FF6 development that the two pitched a concept for Final Fantasy VII. This pitch, however, was seen as too dark, though the higher-ups did let them know that they could turn it into a separate franchise if they were interested. Takahashi took the offer and became director of the new franchise called Xenogears and released on February of 1998. Despite selling over 1 million copies, Square's focus around this time heavily leaned towards Final Fantasy. Not to mention them merging with Enix caused some structural changes within them. An understandable decision since it's Final Fantasy VII, but this led Takahashi to be less and less creatively flexible, thus making him dissatisfied with his new position in the company. For this reason, he decided to found a new development studio along with several other Square employees. That new company became Monolith Soft in October of 1999. While having a rough start finding a publisher, Namco decided to invest in them as a subsidiary. Their first project came to be known as a spiritual successor to Xenogears named Xenosaga. Afterwards, the studio was able to provide new entries for the new franchise and other projects as well. It wasn't long, though, until the company had structural changes internally. Around 2005, Namco struck a deal with Bandai and merged, making the company take less creative risks and leaving Monolith Soft with not as much freedom for the projects. Boy, we've really come full circle here, haven't we? However, after a discussion with Shinji Hatano, an executive director at Nintendo, Monolith Soft sold about 80% of its shares to the company. The two settled on a new contract that Monolith Soft can take more liberties in development so long as they remain a Nintendo exclusive. A very smart deal if I do say so myself. Ever since this acquisition, Monolith Soft stayed as a mainstay developer for both Nintendo and the recently merged Namco Bandai. As a whole, that really sums up the history of the company. Just wanted to mention this to set the stage on how they even got to work for Nintendo since they play a key role here. With that in mind, let's start getting into the events leading up to Operation Rainfall. The year was 2011, and Nintendo's current home console recently released some Japanese RPGs and were getting massive critical success. 3 of those were Xenoblade Chronicles, The Last Story, and Pandora's Tower. While originally thought to be a Japanese exclusive, they did confirm that these titles will get published in Europe. This led many fans to believe that localizations for the US were a possibility. However, Nintendo of America refused since it was too much of a risk for them. This is very confusing, but I get what they're doing. You see, Nintendo's output in major titles on the console heavily decreased around this time, especially in North America. Don't get me wrong, the Wii still had a lot of support, but a lot of it mostly came down to either shovelware, mediocre software, or just simple titles. There weren't many true big-budget projects other than the 3 games aforementioned. So why exactly didn't Nintendo of America want to publish these games? As a matter of fact, the answer is quite simple. They just didn't see localizing the games financially worth it. I'll get into more detail on this later, but considering they actually did try translating various titles only to sell below expectations, it's easy to see why Nintendo of America didn't want to bring the titles over. This refusal was only the start of something they never expected. On June 22nd of 2011, Matthew Minel, a marketing manager for Nintendo of France, made a post on IGN's Wii forum. He was making a proposal to get as many people to send physical letters to Nintendo regarding the 3 games. The goal here was to be able to flood Nintendo's offices with thousands and thousands of these letters. The reason they disregarded sending emails or petitions was because they could easily ignore them. As Minel said, it'll be pretty hard to ignore 1,000 or so pieces of beef jerky sitting on your desk after all. I can't imagine the reaction on their faces. Back to what I was saying, this one post quickly spread around the internet in a matter of days. New posts announcing Operation Rainfall were created, articles were written, and the hope for the games was higher than ever. Heck, it even received an official logo. With the overwhelming amount of letters Nintendo must have received, the articles, and noise from fans, Nintendo ended up just accepting and releasing the games in North America, right? No, not even close to what fans were expecting. Nintendo of America made a statement on their official Facebook page with the following: "We never say never, but we can confirm that there are no plans to bring these 3 games to the Americas at this time. Thank you so much for being great fans." Now, you may be asking yourself, why would Nintendo deconfirm the possibility even after seeing this amount of demand for the games? As stated earlier, it's not so much that they don't want to, but they just didn't see it as a good investment. To further emphasize Reggie's perspective, in a Silicon Era interview he stated the following: "I wanted to bring Xenoblade here. The deal was, how much of a localization effort is it? How many units are we going to sell? Are we going to make money?" We were literally having this debate while Operation Rainfall was happening, and we were aware that there was interest for the game, but we had to make sure that it was a strong financial proposition. I'm paid to make sure that we're driving the business forward, so we're aware of what's happening. But in the end, we've got to do what's best for the company. The thing we know is that 100,000 signatures doesn't mean 100,000 sales. This didn't stop the fans, however. In fact, this message only made them louder. Apparently, Operation Rainfall moved to a new phase called Operation Downpour. During this time, players were printing flyers about the campaign, sticking them up in game stores around the time, and even importing other Japanese games, all to show Nintendo the demand for the titles. Heck, an Amazon pre-order listing which never got removed for the US skyrocketed to becoming the most sold game on the site. It was thanks to this, more headlines, and even that bet I mentioned earlier that got Nintendo of America to finally publish Xenoblade Chronicles. As for Pandora's Tower and The Last Story, those 2 were published by Xseed Games, a publisher known to localize Japanese games to the West. The reasoning behind it seems to be that while Nintendo was publishing Xenoblade, they didn't want to invest in the other 2 games. Because of this, Xseed felt that if they weren't going to publish them, no one else would. Not to mention they claimed that those 2 titles fit under the company's criteria. With that said and done, how are the sales, you may ask? To everyone's relief, they all sold really well and had some form of success. Here are the numbers for each game's release date and sales for North America. Feel free to pause the production. Ever since this announcement, Xenoblade Chronicles has become one of Nintendo's most popular IPs in recent times, and has a fan base bigger than ever now. The other 2 games, they sadly haven't had any acknowledgement nor re-release, but it's still great to see that the fans got what they wanted. Don't worry though, I do have plans to review both of these soon in the future. They're quite fascinating, to say the least. Operation Rainfall is one of the most interesting stories from the games industry. It's a beautiful story on how, with enough dedication and passion, anything's truly possible. And in my opinion, this one event changed the way publishers see the Japanese-styled games in the West. Think about it. The amount of JRPGs released outside of Japan has grown exponentially in the mid to late 2010s, and even more today, just a few years after the campaign was a hit. We got great games like Persona, Valkyria Chronicles 4, Caligula Effect, Scarlet Nexus, and even the recently released Soul Hackers 2. All games with the same day global releases. It showed companies that people all over the world can enjoy these titles. In conclusion, if you're ever interested on trying a JRPG or are a hardcore fan of them, just know that you can thank the wonderful people that proved to Nintendo that there is a market for localizing those games. Now, if you excuse me, I'm off to start my new campaign for a Tokyo Mirage Sessions sequel. I call it Operation Light Show. If we send about 1 million letters along with reading glasses, I'm sure it'll work. This is Akari from Mintjoy Pictures.